there exists a squadron of serious-minded and business-like volunteers called the Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds is at the absolute pinnacle of my career.
Got in the F4. Of course, first thing I thought was, my gosh, I've never seen an airplane this big.
In formation, in tight formation, there was a lot of flow coming around that airplane.
And that's where you get into your mind bone and what it does with muscle memory, and because it will help you fly formation quicker than you can by yourself.
We've got a very short time to get everybody up to speed, the new team and the new show for the next year.
One year we had the Blue Angels come up to our end of year tour, and we flew back-to-back air shows, and the generals were worried about everybody trying to one-up everybody else.
And he comes across the runway at low altitude and passes the reviewing stand, and not a sound, not one sound. One potato, two potato, go boom, and that shock hit.
At some point, you got to realize that it's the Thunderbirds that are famous and not you, and it's just an experience that I'll never forget.
All right, welcome back to this episode. I'm your host, Ryan Notoff, and we have a really special episode today because we're going to be looking at the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds history with the F4 Phantom. And so we're going to be looking at what it's like to fly the F4, the challenges the team had, and really the legacy they helped build. And so here to help me tell that story, we have three fantastic former F4 Thunderbird pilots with us. We're going to start with Steve Dwelle, who was the solo pilot for the Thunderbirds in 1971 and 1972. We also have Kirk Brimmer, who followed Steve as the solo pilot for the team in 1973 and 74. And we're also joined by Al McArtor, the narrator for the team in 1973. So gentlemen, really appreciate you joining me. And before we hop into the discussion about the F4 Phantom, I really wanted to start off with an icebreaker. And so Steve, I thought I'd start with you. First of all, thanks for being here. Nice seeing you again. But I always like to learn what people's call sign is and the story behind how they got them. So Steve Dwelle, if you don't mind, what was your call sign and how did you get it?
Call signs really weren't in the prime in 1971, and I didn't have one. But if I could have one today, it'll be R-E-E-T, Reet, my brother's nickname for me.
Okay, what's the origin of that?
I don't know. Later in life, when I was in the aggressor business, I was commander of the aggressor squadron, and so my call sign was Boss, B-O-S-S.
Oh, there you go. Well, Kirk, I assume then you didn't have a call sign. If you did, what was it? And if not, what would you want it to be?
I had one. It was Beaver, and the origins of that are classified.
Fair enough. What about you, Al? You have a call sign?
Well, I agree with Steve. We didn't really have call signs that prevalently back in the day, but in Vietnam they called me Batman, and on the Thunderbirds I got kind of nicknamed Elmer, and the origin of that was we were doing a PR function someplace, and everybody used to call me Al, and so I introduced myself to this couple, and I said, I'm Al McArtor. And she turned to her husband and says, this here is Elmer Carter. And so, unfortunately, Beaver and I think Tootsie's and others heard that. So from then on, most of you guys call me Elmer.
Oh, great. Well,
I
Al,
think
while we're talking,
the long side of the call signs are when you get one, it's yours. And there's not a darn thing you can do to get rid of it.
Well, Al, while we're chatting, you mentioned Vietnam, and that was actually my lead-in question here. You each flew in Vietnam, right? When you were on the Thunderbirds, Vietnam was towards the end, but prior to your time on the Thunderbirds, you all flew in Vietnam. I'd love to hear about your combat experience at each of you. Now we'll start with you. What was your combat experience specifically? How many missions did you fly? What type of missions? And did you find that any of that flying really translated into the flying that you were doing with the Thunderbirds?
Well, I flew reconnaissance. I flew the RF4, so we were basically single ship missions. We did a lot of low level and flying up north around Haiphong and Hanoi. Flew 200 missions, and like I said, we got my nickname there was Batman because we did a lot of low level night flying. I got pretty good at it, and that's why the squadron called me Batman. But Yeah, I found flying combat exhilarating, to be honest with you. I mean, I always say nobody likes war, but goddamn, I love combat. So I love flying combat.
Yeah. Okay. And Kirk, what about you? What type of missions were you flying in Vietnam, and were you flying the F4 during your combat tour?
I was not. I'd not flown the F-4 until I joined the Thunderbirds. My first airplane out of flight school was an F-100, and my first assignment in that airplane was at Benoit Air Base in South Vietnam. We flew close air support for the most part, and I had 284 missions doing that. I met a couple of three Thunderbirds while I was doing that, so that was kind of my first introduction to the Thunderbird folks.
Gotcha. And Steve, I know you definitely had some combat experience as well. How many missions did you fly, and what were you flying during your time?
I was flying the F-100 as Beaver was, and I flew 198 missions. And my biggest comment is my very first combat mission was about 10 clicks off the end of the runway at Tuiwa, and my 198th combat mission was about 10 clicks off the end of the runway at Tuiwa.
Yeah. Well, you eventually found your way onto the Thunderbirds. And so that's my next question. The Thunderbirds actually have a tryout process, or at least they did when you were on the team. Steve, could you detail the tryout process of the Thunderbirds, and specifically what were they evaluating when you did your tryout?
They evaluated me top to bottom, and it's like the prickly feeling you have all over your body. Which mistake are you going to make first, and try and avoid that one? But I was in Vietnam when Tony McPeak and Jack Dickey were over there, and then Jack Dickey one day said, "Steve, are you ever interested in joining the Thunderbirds?" And I said, "Well, I'm a F-100 fighter pilot in Vietnam, minding my own business, and the Thunderbirds are the Thunderbirds, and then I hold them in a very high pedestal." And he said, "You go apply, which I did. And fortunately, I was selected and then deselected. And then the following year, I was reselected. So a little bit of history there.
Gotcha. And Kirk, my next question is for you. You were actually trained by Steve, if I understand it right. You followed the Steve as the solo pilot. Did Steve train you? And if so, what was he like as a trainer?
Oh, he was a bad guy. I'll tell you what, he was really tough to work for. Actually, Steve and I go back a little further than that. When I was going through F-100 school at Luke, Steve came back to the States and was out there for a couple of days, and I shook hands, met him, and was kind of passing in the night. And then when I went to Wethersfield after my tour in Vietnam, Steve was there. We became very close friends, and he was my instructor pilot there, teaching me how to fly in Europe. So this was kind of like old home week when Steve started checking me out in the F4. Like I say, it was my first shot at the F4. My checkout in that airplane consisted of 1 week where I went down. The guy said, "That's the airplane. Here's the book. Go read it. Let's go fly." And a week later, I was at Nellis and getting in the backseat with Steve, and away we went.
Nice. And Al, you made the team your first year, I think 1973 as the narrator. Was the narrator something that you wanted to be selected for your first year with the Thunderbirds? How did they decide that you were the narrator? And could you give some more insight into what the narrator does? Obviously, I think the general public, they show up to an air show, they just see you narrating. The role is so much larger than that. So I was hoping you could detail it as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I came back from Vietnam, my first inclination was to go to test pilot school. I wanted to be an astronaut, and I got talked out of that by General Chuck Yeager. He said, "We got more astronauts than we know what to do with," and he says, "I've looked at your records, and with your personality, I think you'd be bored stiff flying zero G's tests up at Wright-Patterson." So an old mentor of mine from the Air Force Academy said, "Go to graduate school and come back here and teach." So I thought my flying days were over. I went to graduate school, went back to the Air Force Academy to teach. And my classmates, Nels Running and Jerry Bolt, were both Thunderbirds. And they said, "You ought to try out for the team." And I said, I haven't been in an airplane, much less flying formation, for a year and a half. And he said, "Just do it anyway. You're not going to make it your first time." So I tried out, and son of a gun, I got selected. So I went out to Nellis for the finals, and Steve Dwelle actually flew in the back seat, and Tom Swan was lead, and we went out and flew around, and Steve could tell you what he was looking for, but basically they're looking for judgment. And when are you smart enough to separate and rejoin if you get cupped or out of position? And so the flight went pretty well, and I got selected. I suspect that because I hadn't been in the cockpit for a while, going to school and all, that they probably felt the best way to get back in the game was to be narrator. And then typically your narrator job is followed with a position on the team. I assumed the number 2 left wing position after Nels running left, and was ops officer of the team. And I was there about 4 months, and then through some other circumstances, I found myself in a decision time. Gracie and I had a young daughter that had brain cancer, and she could not be treated in the Air Force, so I left the Air Force. So I was left wing for a short time, and then left the team in 74.
Yeah, well, I was sorry to read about that. Steve, I wanted to transition to you. When you were on the team and when you were all on the team, it was a single solo pilot versus today where you see a dual solo pilot for the Thunderbirds. What did the routine consist of with a solo pilot, and was there any talk about possibly adding a second solo pilot when you guys were flying those F4 Phantoms?
Well, I mentioned earlier, Ryan, that I was selected and then deselected my first time for the Thunderbirds. And I came home from Vietnam to go to the Thunderbirds and got a kit at Twix that said, "Remain at Luke, do not pass go." And what happened is I was hired as a new second solo, and Creech didn't know anything about that. And I was as a result, I stayed at Luke and was instructor pilot in the F-100 for a year, and then applied the next year, which was a pretty damn difficult job applying the second time, believe me, after having been selected. But I was fortunately selected, and onward from there.
Gotcha. And Kirk, you had mentioned that you flew the F-100 in Vietnam. I was wondering if you could compare and contrast flying the F-100 to the F-4 Phantom.
The flying characteristics were very similar. They're both swept wing. They both had an adverse yaw issue. But the F-100 had significantly less power than the F-4. When I got in the F-4, of course, first thing I thought was, my gosh, I've never seen an airplane this big. And what's that extra seat for? And then I started flying it, and it flew very much the same as the F-100, just a whole lot more power.
Nice. And Al, correct me if I'm wrong. I read that you flew the F-104 when you first joined the Air Force. So I was wondering if you could give me a similar comparison of flying the F-104, which is a really unique looking aircraft, to that big F-4 Phantom.
Well, sure, but I have to say the F-104 Starfighter was my sweetheart. Single engine, single seat fighter, had no wings, so it was faster than hell, but kind of difficult in a dogfight. But I was down at Homestead Air Force Base in Miami because of the MiGs in Cuba, flying a 104. But when I got into the F4, I agree with Beaver that it had an enormous amount of power. But I think the same person that designed the Kleenex box designed the F4. You put 2 J79 engines on it, though it flew pretty well. But in tight formation, there was a lot of flow coming around that airplane, and so you had to get yourself into a position, kind of like when you're water skiing, where you would find that sweet spot, and if you got a little farther out of it, it would kick you out, and if you got a little further in, it would kick you in. So the wash coming over lead was fairly significant and made really tight formation flying a little difficult, I found.
Gotcha. And one of the unique things about the time that you guys served in the Thunderbirds is that it's the only time in history when both the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels flew the same platform of the F-4 Phantom. So, Steve, I'll start with you, but this is for anyone. Did you guys have any sort of technical alliance or partnership or agreement where you guys did some cross collaborating just to, I guess, get some optimization out of the aircraft or the demonstration?
We did not, Ryan, and the closest we got to that is one year we had the Blue Angels come up to our end of year tour, and we flew back-to-back air shows, and the generals were worried about everybody trying to one-up everybody else. My job was with a single solo, as the Blues had two solos. It's just to have everything on my mark, and I never felt any competitive desire to perform something that I hadn't been quite well trained to do, and it was a great fun deal.
And Kirk and Al, did you have any specific Blue Angel interactions from your perspective when you were flying the F4?
We did a joint show down in Pensacola. It was hilarious. I mean, absolutely hilarious. We had a great time with them, but I would agree with Steve. It wasn't really a competitive sort of thing, but most of what we did down in Pensacola is also classified. The statute of limitations has not run out yet on that, but we had a blast with our Blue Angel friends.
Kirk, anything to add?
Not so much to add, just to go along with when we went down for that show that Al's talking about. We talked a good bit about techniques, and we found out that we both flew basically the same air show or a very similar air show, but we had vastly different techniques. For instance, the solo pilot for the Blues liked to have his airplane trimmed full nose down, so that if something happened to him when he was inverted at low altitude, all he had to do was let go of the stick and it would fly up. When Steve taught me how to do it, we had it trimmed pretty close to neutral so that we were pulling against the pressures and actually flying the airplane at the point we wanted it. So just a difference in technique. It got to the same point and provided pretty much the same result.
Yeah, that's great insight. I did want to transition here, and Steve, this is directly directed at you. Dulles, 1972, the team suffered tragedy with the loss of Joe Howard. I was wondering if you could walk us through the circumstances of that day and also how the team worked through a recovery of getting back on the road and dealing with tragedy.
Ryan, it was a tough day and a tough recovery. The weather was gorgeous. It was on a Sunday, and Joe Howard had problems with his number 3 airplane, and we had to hold for a while he jumped out and jumped in a spare, and off we went. The show went fine through about 3/4 of the way through the show. We had just finished a wedge roll, and we were about 20 degrees nose high coming up on wings level in our climb. And boom, I was outside left, and an airplane in my vision departed the formation so quickly I didn't even know who it was. And I thought it was the leader for initially. And what happened is Joe Howard had a mechanical linkage between the stick and the horizontal stabilizer brake broke in two, and the air loads drove the horizontal stabilizer full nose up, and Joe departed the formation so fast. Like I said, I didn't know who was gone. Joe said, "I'm bailing out," and he got a good shoot, and we're all home free. And unfortunately, the fireball, Joe was too close to the fireball and melted his nylon in his parachute. The cause of the accident was a failure of a mechanical piece of the flight control system, which is unfortunate as hell.
Yeah, and so terrible accident. Can you talk to me about what the team does to recover from that, Steve? Do you guys fly the next air show? Do you find a replacement pilot? How does the team move forward?
Funny that you should mention that, Ron, because the very next thing that happened was we departed the next day for the Air Force Academy. And I'm going to tell you a story about what your mind bone does to help you fly airplanes. And on the Thunderbirds, I always flew left side, left side, left side. And so Schwam said, "Okay, Dwelle, you get on the right wing for takeoff." And we rolling down the runway. And the closer I got to the boss on my left, the more my hand pushed to the left because it was being trained to move further away. And it's the damnedest thing I ever had to fight in my whole life. And to keep from wrapping up everybody into a ball, I went deep immediately after takeoff until I could see the airplanes above me, and I just strong-armed my way back up into position, but I was a horrible formation pilot at that point. And that's where you get into your mind bone and what it does with muscle memory, and because it will help you fly formation quicker than you can by yourself, provided you're trained. And I've trained on the left side, and the right side was awful. I flew my very first bomb burst maneuver from the right wing position at the Air Force Academy, and that was a fight for my own life as well. But at any rate, what I demonstrated to myself is you get so trained in one position on the left side, and your mind actually helps you make a move before you ever see something ready to react to it. Unfortunately, you moved me over the other side, and it's correcting the wrong damn way, and I had to fight it. So, a strange circumstance.
Gotcha. And I am going to stick on the subject of loss here because, Al, you mentioned Jerry Bolt in some earlier comments, and you also, the team lost Jerry Bolt. And I think when you first joined the team, you mentioned you were close friends with him. I'd like to pay tribute to him. Can you tell us a little bit about Jerry Bolt and the person who he was?
Well, he was one of the finest guys that you could ever hope to meet, and genuine friend. I knew him quite well, and he and his crew chief, Chuck Lynn, were on a test flight on December 21st and did not come back from the test flight. Never really quite understood what caused their accident, but it was devastating. It was just absolutely devastating, and it was very tough coming back from that.
Gotcha. And Kirk, so my follow-up for you as someone that was moving into the demonstration at this time, how hard was it for you in such a high-profile position? And I think Steve touched on it a little bit here, but for you personally, being so new to the Thunderbirds, how hard after an accident like that is it for you to then go, learn to fly in this demonstration?
The facts around the accident and the few days afterwards were a real gut check. I was the new guy coming in. I didn't know Jerry Bolt other than for, a very short period of time. I knew him well enough to know that he was one fine fella and that I was really going to enjoy working with him. And then the days surrounding the accident, were, as Steve said, real gut check. But as far as training goes, I think you probably touched on it. We've got to move on. We've got a very short time to get everybody up to speed, the new team and the new show for the next year. And so as soon as we got back after the Christmas vacation, we started flying practice shows, and we proceeded on down the road.
Gotcha. Well, and speaking of air shows, Steve, I'll come back to you. I think the teams flew a lot more air shows back in the F4 days. How many air shows roughly did you guys fly when you were on the team? And did you have a favorite show site?
We did pretty close to 120 air shows a year, which at the end of 2 years, I was pooped. I was tired. I lost weight. I quit smoking on the team because I was trying to find better health. That's a good side of it. But and we were gone so many days a year that we all lost leave every year, and it was 2 minutes. Now today, the team is flying half of that, and I think they've gone from one extreme to the other, and you got a bunch of go for guys in there. They're pawing at the ground, wanting to fly more air shows, would be my guess. So I think we've gone the wrong way too far.
Yeah, we had
Gotcha.
121.
Oh,
121.
how many, Al?
121 and 73.
Yeah, and as actually my next question is for you because you also, I believe, went to South America in 1973. So I was wondering what it was like to coordinate an air show overseas or a tour, a small mini tour of air shows overseas, what complications that presents to you and just with the different languages and laws and such.
Oh, talk about dozens of stories. We had an incredibly interesting South American tour. It was a long tour. And I didn't speak Spanish, but we had a PR officer, Jorge Reynoso, and he was his family was from Ecuador, and he spoke Spanish and a little bit of Portuguese, which helped us in Brazil. So the plan was that Jorge would fly in my back seat for going down to be the advance airplane at these show sites, and which worked kind of well in some respects, but English is supposed to be the universal air traffic control language. Well, it certainly wasn't on this trip. So I had a hard time getting hold of any towers and approach controls and everything flying down there by ourselves. But one story that sticks out that involves you, Beaver, is we did the air show in La Paz, Bolivia, which is very, very high altitude, as you know, and so the Diamond actually went supersonic on the downside of a couple of maneuvers, and so in fact the communist newspaper there said that the Thunderbirds had been bombing the outskirts of La Paz. So the word gets out that we flew supersonic in La Paz. We get to Quito, Ecuador, and the president of Ecuador said he wants supersonic. And I tried to explain to Jorge that, no, we're supersonic, this, high altitude, pressure altitude, this. He didn't want to hear anything of it. The air attaché is begging me, you guys got to have a supersonic, something supersonic. So we got together and we said, all right, Beaver, we got to have a supersonic pass. So we're doing the air show. And I'd say something, and Jorge would hobble, and I'd say something, hobble, and we'd look high to your right, and solo pilot Captain Kirk Brimmer is diving at the runway for a supersonic pass, and here comes Beaver, like sculling down, and just as he started to level out, the vapor trail started coming around the airplane. You could actually see the shock attached to the nose of the airplane. And he comes across the runway at low altitude and passes the reviewing stand, and not a sound, not one sound, one potato, two potato, go boom, and that shock hit, and all the windows in the terminal started shaking back and forth, and the president's got a big grin on his face, and the air attachés over there having kind of a fruit of the loom moment, but he finally started smiling. But that was our supersonic pass in Quito, Ecuador.
Nice. Hey, Kirk, so you were kind of summoned there. Do you have any stories from that trip, or is there any special preparation that's required when you're flying overseas that's different than domestically?
For those of us flying the show, there really wasn't much difference. Al and Jorge took care of getting everything set up. We'd go out and do the show, and of course, we did that in English. But one of the things with at the end of the show, with Jorge doing the narration, as we all stood out in front of the airplanes, the narrator would say, and we have thoroughly enjoyed doing this aerial demonstration in our F4E. And when he said F4E, the guys in front of the airplane would come to attention and salute and turn around, and then all go join the boss at the first airplane. Well, Jorge forgot that part. And so here you got all of us standing in front of our airplanes trying to figure out what we're going to do. And somebody just turned around and screamed F4E, and away we went. So there are a lot of little vignettes going along with that made it interesting.
Gotcha. And unfortunately, I think 1973 marked the final year of the F4 Phantom for both the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. In particular, the Blue Angels had a terrible accident in 1973 at Lakehurst, New Jersey, that saw them lose 2 pilots and a crew chief and 2 airplanes. Was there talk prior to that accident of the team, specifically the Thunderbirds, transitioning away from the F4 to the T-38, or was it the accident with the Blues that really kind of served as the catalyst for both teams moving away from the F4? Al, I'll throw that one to you.
No, the Blues didn't affect it. The price of gas affected it in the Carter administration. People were lined up for a mile trying to get gasoline, and they didn't understand that we weren't burning their gasoline. And so Tactical Air Command was considering doing away with Thunderbirds. It was a very, very delicate issue from a PR point of view, because there was so much negative PR about us flying gas guzzling airplanes. And they finally settled on, well, if we went to a less gas guzzling airplane like a T-38, we could continue with the team. But it was a very, very delicate circumstance for Tactical Air Command. And quite frankly, from my point of view, I was very much involved in that and how it might affect the Thunderbird team.
Okay, gotcha. And then, Kirk, you actually were part of the transition as far as you flew the F4, but you also flew the T-38 in the Thunderbird Air Show too. So, can you give us some insight into how the team managed that transition? And back to comparing and contrasting aircraft here, how would you compare and contrast the F4 versus the T-38?
Once again, it was a very hectic time, and you got to throw a bone out to the boys out on the line. They figured out that they could convert the T-38 faster than we could get it done at the factory. So they did all of the conversions right there at Nellis, and did all of that in about 3 months or so. And they converted while we sat for a while. Finally got checked out in the T-38. The T-38 was not an easy air show airplane, as opposed to the F-4. F-4 weighed 35 or 38,000 pounds, I believe, or more perhaps. The T-38 weighed like 17 or 18,000 pounds. It was just like a leaf out there, and when we got in rough air with it, it was really tough to handle. We appreciated the big airplane. We also appreciated the fact that the T-38 was kind of a placeholder until the team could get back into a fighter again. And we were just in the point where we were part of that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Steve, as we start to wrap up here, want to go back to you, and I'll ask this to all three of you. Do you have a favorite memory or time when you look back on the Thunderbirds, or a specific story that still just stands out to this day? Steve, we'll start with you.
I do, Ryan. One day in an air show, a rival show back at Nellis, I was in the process of attempting to do an inverted to inverted, and my minimum altitude upside down is 75 feet. And as I came through to do upside down, everything's fine. And in the process of the roll, my seatbelt untucked a loop in it. And when I finished the roll and ended up upside down again, all I could see was dirt. And I was up against the canopy with my head canted sideways, and I just two-blocked the stick and pegged the G meter at -4 and counted the 1 potato, 2 potato, and rolled back right side up, hoping I would see blue sky instead of dirt, and I did. So that's one that I will never, that's one maneuver I'll never forget.
No doubt. Kirk, what about you?
Had an interesting experience during the autograph session after an air show, someplace that I've forgotten. But my instructor, T-37 instructor pilot, came up and said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Well, I sure do." And so I introduced him to all the people that were gathered around for autographs. I said, "This is the guy that taught me how to fly T-37s. He's also the guy that would not let me solo in formation in the T-37 because I wasn't a good enough solo or formation pilot." So everybody got a good laugh out of that one.
Yeah. And
And
Al, how about
maybe
you?
that's why they made me the solo pilot, because I wasn't a good enough formation pilot.
Al, I'm sure you have a lot of good stories just as a narrator. You mentioned South America. What any other stories that stick out for you?
There are lots of stories, but I'd like to bring one thing up that has nothing to do with flying. But back in that day, in the early 70s, men's fashion was really, really weird. And we had a haberdasher named Rich Burnite, and he would select blazers and pants and belts and everything for the team. And we had some of the damnedest outfits you could ever imagine. We had red, white, and blue striped polyester pants and red, white, blue belts. And this is Beaver, you remember these. And every once in a while, Rich would say, "I've got something new," and we'd all go down and take a look at these things, and that was kind of the fashion then. But we had some outrageous official Thunderbird outfits.
Yeah. Well, Al, I want to stick with you for a second, because you were actually the FAA director, I believe, for 2 years under the Reagan administration. You were working for FedEx in the very, very early days of FedEx. How would you compare and contrast your time on the Thunderbirds with those other prestigious positions?
Well, quite frankly, I love the Thunderbirds. It was one of the outstanding things that I've been fortunate enough to do in my career. And then when I left the Air Force, which I loved every minute of it, when I left the Air Force, I was blessed with being able to do some things. I ended up running the FedEx airline for Fred Smith, who was a mentor and good friend. And as you mentioned, I ran the FAA for a couple of years and started my own airline, and then ran the Airbus operation on the side of the Atlantic for almost 20 years. So I've been really blessed, and I've seen aviation from a number of different angles, and still am engaged. But I think the highlight of my flying and team association was the Thunderbird team.
And then Kirk, how about you? Where do the Thunderbirds fit into your career? What do the Thunderbirds, looking back on it, mean to you today?
There's absolutely no question. What Al said was exactly spot on. The search for excellence, the fact that you don't accept anything other than perfection. You never get there, but if you accept something less, that means for sure you're not going to improve. And that was 2 years of that with the Thunderbirds. And that's really carried on. I'm kind of a perfectionist, certainly not perfect, but I look at something and I think that piece of paper needs to be rotated 45 degrees on the table or something like that. So it's something you look back on. You have to, at some point, you got to realize that it's the Thunderbirds that are famous and not you. And it's just an experience that I'll never forget. And every day when I come into my office, I get to look at some of my I love me stuff on the wall and enjoy it all over again.
Fantastic. And Steve, we'll close out with you. What have the Thunderbirds meant for your career?
Thunderbirds is at the absolute pinnacle of my career, and I'd love to do 20 years as a Thunderbird, although I'd probably weigh 110 pounds by now and be a nervous wreck. It was pretty demanding 2 years. As I said, we're doing 120 plus air shows a year, and doing a third year on it was something I would, don't know whether I would have volunteered to do another one or not, but absolute pinnacle of my career, and loved every moment of it.
Well, I appreciate that. And gentlemen, I got to thank you again. Thanks for sharing your stories. People love that F4 era, so we love getting the insight. We love the Thunderbirds. Can't thank you enough for being here, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks,
You
Ryan.
bet.
Thanks, Ryan.